Hi everyone, today I'm sharing my fall TBR list of books that I am planning to read this fall because I think they really match the atmosphere of this season and maybe I can provide some inspiration for you. So, I have books in three genres today that I would like to present: horror, fantasy, and literary fiction. So, for horror, the first book on my list is The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. And I'm just gonna read you a little blurb. The best known of Shirley Jackson's novels and a major inspiration for writers like Neil Gaiman and Stephen King. The Haunting of Hill House is a chilling story of the power of fear. It's a powerful work of slow-burning psychological horror. And Donna Tartt, the author of The Goldfinch and the Secret History, said, Shirley Jackson's stories are among the most terrifying ever written, which is very high praise from one of my favorite authors that I will actually mention later in this video. So that was very convincing to me. And I don't like to inform myself too much about the plot of a book before I read it because I prefer to be surprised. All I know is that this is about four people in a haunted house. And honestly, I think that's all I need to know. I don't normally read horror. I read the Goosebump books and Fear Street when I was a kid. I think that many people probably remember these books from their childhood because they were huge, but except for that, I really don't know if I've ever read a horror novel before, and I'm also not big on horror films, so this whole genre is quite new to me, but I think it just matches the season of Halloween and All Saints Day and Hallow Day and fog and darkness very well, so I think it will be a fun time. And then next on my list is Salem's Lot by Stephen King. Again, I'm just gonna read the blurb to you. Ben Mears has returned to Jerusalem's Lot in hopes that exploring the history of the Marston House, an old mansion long the subject of rumor and speculation, will help him cast out his personal devils and provide inspiration for his new book. When two young boys venture into the woods and only one returns, he begins to realize that something sinister is at work. In fact, his hometown is under siege from forces of darkness beyond his imagination, and only he, with a small group of allies, can hope to contain the evil that is growing within the borders of this small New England town. With this, his second novel, Stephen King established himself as an indisputable master of American horror, able to transform the old conceits of the genre into something fresh and all the more frightening for taking place in a familiar, idyllic place. So I know that this is about vampires. Well, I don't know how central vampires are to the plot, but I know that vampires are not the sparkly romantic ones that I also like, but the monstrous ones feature in this book, which is intriguing to me because I quite like fantasy and I quite like the myth of the vampire. Obviously, Stephen King is, I don't know, maybe he is the most famous horror writer in the world. Certainly, I think he's one of the most prolific. He's written so many books, but I've actually only ever read a few short stories by him. So, this will be my first um, full length novel, and it's also longer than the novels I normally read. at 672 pages. It's quite a long read, so I hope it will be gripping and fast paced enough not to be a slog. But I have heard high praise for this, so I want to give it a shot. And now moving on to the next genre, fantasy, specifically dark fantasy, because I think there's also cozy fantasy, but what I went for with these books that I'm gonna mention is more of a mysterious, darker tone. So the first on my list is The Language of Thorns, Midnight Tales and Dark Magic by Leigh Bardugo. Inspired by myth, fairy tale, and folklore, #1 New York Times best-selling author Leigh Bardugo has crafted a deliciously atmospheric collection of short stories filled with betrayals, revenge, sacrifice, and love. So this is a collection of 6 stories illustrated as well. And I read the preview and I wanted to know how the story continues. So I ordered the book. And what I get from this is I think the stories can be counted as fairy tales in the dark. So I thought it was very fitting. And then the next book on the list is House of Hollow by Krystal Sutherland, which is a YA mystery slash horror novel. And it's described as a dark, twisty, modern fairy tale where 3 sisters discover that they are not exactly all that they seem, and evil things really do go bump in the night. Something happened to them when they were children that they can't quite remember, but that left each of them with an identical half-moon scar at the base of their throats. So again, I read the preview for this and I was intrigued enough to order the book. I'm not opposed to reading YA at all, even though I am technically an adult. In fact, one of my favorite writers, Markus Zusak, writes YA. But what sometimes annoys me about YA, now that I'm not a teenager anymore, is that even though the themes and the plot is still interesting to me, sometimes the language gets on my nerve because it's not very beautiful or it's too informal for my liking. But I liked the writing style of this in the preview that I read, so I'm not too concerned. And then the next book in this category is, I think the title is already very, very dark and intriguing. The title is My Throat, An Open Grave by Tori Bovalino. In the small town of Winston, Pennsylvania, they fear the Lord of the Wood almost as much as they fear God. According to legend, ghosts of the nearby forest steal unattended babies, leaving enigmatic tokens of wood and bone in their place. Leah Jones didn't believe the legend, thinking it was just a way to scare the local kids, until her baby brother Owen disappears. She must abandon her dead-end life and plunge headfirst into the unknown magical forest to write a song that will win her brother back. She quickly discovers that another pact was made for her long ago. So again, I think this sounds like a fairy tale and like a dark and eerie story. I like the religious theme and the theme of supernatural beings in a forest. I just think that it sounds like quite an entertaining and suitable quick read for fall. And looking at this, I think this is probably YA as well from the sounds of it. And then moving on to the last category, literary fiction. I think, of course, you can read literary fiction all year round. I mean, technically, I think you can read whatever you want all year round, but what I would say is the appeal of reading it in fall is just that I don't know, I think literary fiction is not, well, it has more depth than genre fiction, I would say. And I think that matches the darkness of fall. And yeah, it's just, it tends to be more complex and more philosophical. And I think that cold autumn days and dark days invite this kind of contemplation and introspectiveness, perhaps more than spring or summer. So these two books on my list are actually rereads, so I already read them, and they were among the best books that I read in the last years. But I didn't read them in fall, and I really wanted to reread them in fall. So they are both by Donna Tartt, The Secret History and The Goldfinch. And if you watch videos about books, then you probably already know what The Secret History is about, or you've already read it. But in case you haven't, it's set in the 90s at a small college in the US, and it's about an eclectic group of friends who commit a murder. And that's not a spoiler because we already know that this is gonna happen on the first page. It's not a why done it, but it's a who done it. So the book explores like the inner lives of these characters and their relationships with each other and what happened that drove them to this point and how this event affects them. So it's very philosophical. It has very interesting characters, and the prose is absolutely beautiful, almost lyrical. If you like beautiful language and poems, then this will definitely appeal. And then, so this book is like both of these books, The Secret History and The Goldfinch, are quite long. I don't know exactly how long, but I can't remember, but I think between 500 and 800 pages. But they don't drag at all. I prefer to read books that are no more than 350 pages normally, but I didn't find these a slog at all. Um, so yeah. And then the other book by Donna Tartt that I would like to reread that I have already written, not written, of course, that I have already read before is The Goldfinch. And this is quite different in terms of the, the story and the plot, but the gorgeous prose and writing style is just as beautiful as in The Secret History, if not more. There are so many beautiful sentences that I copied from this book and wrote down into a little words document because they were just so beautiful. And this is a story about one person. It starts when he's 13 and then we follow him to his adulthood. So I guess you could say it's a bit of a coming of age, but it's not a YA story. It's definitely for adults. And this boy's life is basically torn apart when he's 13 and loses his mother. And coincidentally, he comes into the possession of a very valuable and world famous painting, the painting The Goldfinch. Like, this is a painting that actually exists in real life. And then basically we follow his life as he's growing up and he gets entangled into some very morally questionable and dark endeavors. I think that's all I'm gonna say for the plot, but it's just it's a very long and very beautiful book. It's almost like reading a painting. That's how beautiful it is. Although, and it has extremely complex characters, and everything feels very real, like the depictions of the places and the portrayal of the relationships and the characters and all the little quirks. It all feels very realistic. The author spent, I think, almost a decade working on this book, and it really shows. So that is all I had to say today on this. If you have read any of these, then feel free to let me know what you thought. And if you have a TBR list of your own for fall, then feel free to share. I would be curious to hear what you want to read this fall. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.